When Emily moved into her new apartment, she was eager to start fresh. The building was old but charming, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and quaint little shops. It seemed like the perfect place to escape the noise and chaos of the city. The first thing Emily noticed was how quiet her neighbors were. Her apartment sat between two others. On one side lived an elderly woman, and on the other, a couple with a young child. She'd only seen them briefly while moving in. Nods exchanged in the hallway, quick glances, nothing more. They were the kind of neighbors who kept to themselves, which suited Emily just fine. As the days passed, Emily couldn't help but notice just how silent her neighbors were. She never heard a TV or radio, no conversations, not even footsteps. It was as if the apartments next to hers were vacant. Occasionally, she'd catch a glimpse of them through the crack in their doorways, a shadow moving behind a curtain, a figure passing by. But there was no sound. It wasn't until one night, after she'd been living there for a few weeks, that Emily began hearing the strange noises. It was just past midnight when it started, a soft tapping sound, like fingernails drumming against a wall. It was faint, almost rhythmic, coming from the apartment on her left, where the elderly woman lived. She thought little of it at first, assuming it was the old woman moving around, perhaps tapping her cane or fiddling with something. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more erratic as the minutes passed. Annoyed, Emily knocked on the wall, hoping to signal to her neighbor to quiet down. The tapping stopped immediately. Relieved, she settled back into bed, but her comfort was short-lived. A new sound emerged, this time from the apartment on her right. It was soft at first, like whispering, too quiet to make out, but unmistakably there. The whispers came in bursts, like hurried conversations, muffled as if spoken through a thick wall. Curious and unnerved, Emily pressed her ear against the wall. The voices continued, but no words were clear, just whispers, overlapping and hissing, rising in intensity. She knocked again, hoping to signal to her neighbors, but the whispers stopped, leaving an unsettling silence. The next day, Emily decided to check in with her neighbors. She knocked on the elderly woman's door but got no response. She knocked again, louder this time, and still nothing. Finally, she tried the couple's door on the right. After several minutes, the door creaked open just a crack. A woman stood behind it, her face partially hidden in shadow. She looked pale, her eyes wide and glassy. "Hi, I live next door," Emily said, forcing a smile. "I just wanted to check in. I heard some noise last night and wanted to make sure everything was okay." The woman stared at her for a moment before slowly shaking her head. Without a word, she closed the door. Emily stood there, unsettled, but decided to let it go. That night, the noises returned, this time louder and more disturbing. The tapping was faster, more frantic, and the whispers had turned into unintelligible murmurs, layered with a strange, wet sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. Emily felt her skin crawl. It was as if the entire building was alive, with strange, unearthly sounds. Unable to take it any longer, Emily called the building manager. She explained the situation, the noises, the strange neighbors, the eerie silence during the day. The manager seemed puzzled. "That's impossible," he said. "No one's lived in those apartments for years." Emily froze. "What do you mean? I've seen them. I've talked to them." The manager sighed. "I'm sorry, but those apartments have been vacant since the last tenants passed away. You must be mistaken." Terrified, Emily rushed back to her apartment, her mind racing. She couldn't understand what was happening. How could the apartments be empty? She had seen the people, spoken to them. As night fell once again, the noises returned, more intense than ever before. The tapping now came from both sides, the whispers merging into an unsettling chorus of voices, speaking words she couldn't understand. Emily huddled in her bed, covering her ears, trying to drown out the sounds, but they only grew louder, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. In a panic, Emily burst out of her apartment and ran to the building manager's office. She demanded to see the records of the apartments next to hers. Reluctantly, the manager handed her the files. As she flipped through them, her heart sank. The elderly woman had died in her sleep 2 years ago. The couple next door had perished in a tragic accident, their child disappearing without a trace. Their apartments had been sealed ever since. Emily dropped the papers, her hands trembling. The silent neighbors weren't neighbors at all. They were ghosts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos.